So now let's look at an example of actually applying and using the quadratic equation. So here, if you look at your homework number 15, I've got this expression. This quadratic at the top of my screen should be the same as the one that you have on your homework 15. So question 1, part A says, is this expression above? Or is the expression above in standard form? If not, write it in standard form. So what do you think? Is this expression in standard form? Yeah, so hopefully by now you know that this expression is already in standard form. So I really don't have to rewrite it. I'm just going to write it down here. It's already in standard form. So we've got x squared minus 2x minus 15 is equal to 0. Now, part B says identify A, B, and C. So what do you think our A is in this expression? So hopefully by now you know that the A is the number in front of the x squared. And in fact, let me just write up here at the top the general form of a quadratic that is in standard form. So we've got ax squared plus bx plus c is equal to 0. So we can see by looking at the general expression that our A is the number immediately in front of the x squared term, or the coefficient of the x squared term. So it's the number right before the x squared. So in this case, it doesn't look like anything's there, but we know that there's an understood 1 in front of the x squared. So in this case, in this particular case, A is equal to positive 1. Now what do you think? Look at our general expression, and we'll say B is right here. B is right in front of the x variable. So knowing that, what do you think B is in our expression that we are trying to solve? Yeah, so hopefully you were able to say that B here is equal to negative 2. Don't forget that negative. So B is the number right in front of x, and here it's a negative 2. So we go down here and we say B is equal to negative 2. Now what do you think? What do you think C is equal to? Yeah, so in this particular expression, C is going to be the constant. You can see here in the general expression that C is the number that does not have a variable attached to it. In this case, negative 15 is the only term that doesn't have a constant attached to it. So C is our constant, which in this case is going to be C is equal to negative 15. Now let's look at part C. It says write the quadratic equation down and then plug and chug. Now what does that mean, plug and chug? I'll show you as soon as I write the quadratic equation down. So yesterday we found that x, the variable x, is equal to negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. Now, what I mean by plug and chug is, at this point, if we want to solve this quadratic equation, now that we know what A, B, and C are, all we have to do is just plug in B for B, A for A, there's two A's here, and plug in C for C. And then plug this into our calculator and solve. And then we have successfully solved for X. And if that seems like it's just way too easy, or a lot easier than completing the square or factoring, that's because it is. This is the easiest way that you're going to be able to solve any quadratic equation. Any quadratic equation that you have, you can easily plug in the numbers. As long as you can identify what A, B, and C are, you can solve for the unknown variable x. Now remember, it doesn't have to be x. It could be t squared and t, or it could be a squared and a. Regardless of what your variable is going to be equal to this formula. So what does that look like? Let's just plug B in for B, A in for A, and C in for C, and let's see what we get. For this particular problem, and it may be useful if I just go ahead and go to the next slide so we have a little bit more real estate to work with here. So let's go to the next slide. And I've already written the quadratic equation down, and I've also written down our A, B, and C from the previous slide. So let's just plug these numbers in and solve. So I'll plug in negative 2 for B. Let's start here. So that's equal to, so we've got negative, okay, don't forget about this negative sign out front, a negative B. We still have to keep our negative with our B. So I say negative 2 plus or minus, which means we're going to have two solutions in the end, the square root, okay, this is b squared, so we've got negative 2 squared, not on here, minus 4ac. So we've got minus 4 times a, and a is 1. Okay, you can see I plugged in my 1 for the a, and now I plug in c into c, and I get c is negative 15, and we just square root all of that, all over 2 times a. So we got 2 times a, which is 1, and this is all equal to the variable x. Okay, so let's break this down. Let's solve this in different pieces. So we've got, here at the beginning, we've got negative times a negative. That's going to give me a positive, so that's equal to positive 2 plus or minus the square root, okay, negative 2 squared. Now, negative 2 times negative 2, that's going to give me positive 4. Positive 4 minus, we've got 4 times 1 times negative 15. So 4 times 1, that's 4. And 4 times, really it's negative 4 times negative 15. And that's going to give me a positive because I've got a negative 4 times a negative 15. So that gives me positive. And 4 times 15 is, of course, 60. 60. So I really made my square root a little too long here, but that's okay. So we've got 4 plus 60 all over the 2 times 1, which is just 2. Now all of this is going to be equal to 2 plus or minus. Okay, now I'm just going to add 60 plus 4, that's 64. 64, the square root of 64, all over 2. Okay, now what can be multiplied by itself to give me 64? Yeah, so hopefully you were able to say that 8 times 8 will give me the 64. So we get 2 plus or minus 8. Now some of you may be saying, well, shouldn't we get a plus or minus sign that pops out of here? Well, yes, but we've already got the plus or minus sign out here, so we don't have to double up. Because it's still going to be the same thing. So after you take the square root, the plus or minus sign still pops out, but we've already got a plus or minus sign out here, so you don't have to do plus or minus 8. That's saying the same thing. So we only need 1. So plus or minus 8 all over 2. So that gives me my 2 solutions, and I break this up into my 2 solutions, and I get 2 plus 8 divided by 2, and I get 2 minus 8, because this is plus or minus on the top. So it's 2 plus 8 over 2, that's this solution, and then 2 minus 8 over 2, and that's my second solution. So I plug this in my calculator, I get 8 plus 2, that's going to be 10, and 10 divided by 2, that's going to give me 5. And then we get 2 minus 8, that's going to give me, on the top, that's going to give me negative 6 divided by 2, which is going to be negative 3. And there are my 2 solutions. So pretty easy, huh? Not too bad. As long as you know how to find your A, B, and C, and you know what the quadratic formula is, it's just a simple plug and chug problem, meaning you just plug in the numbers and then chug through the problem, just like a train. You just plug and chug through the entire problem until you find your 5 and your negative 3, which are the solutions to this particular quadratic. Okay, guys, so if you didn't quite understand that, just raise your hand and let me know, and we can walk through it a little bit slower, one-on-one. But if I'm busy right now, then just go ahead and go to the second problem. There's another Educating video that you can walk through, and I'm going to go through another example to show you how to use the quadratic formula. Thanks, guys.